But there's no real-world equivalent to the ships and fleets in Star Citizen, so real-world navies are the next best thing. I have 12 years of experience as a warfare officer in the Royal Navy, on warships from minesweepers to aircraft carriers. I've taken part in maritime security and counter-piracy operations as part of the command team on the bridge, and operated with multinational task groups. Starships and Warships is where I take something Star Citizen and look at it from a naval officer's perspective. As long as it would be fun and enhance the game, we'll talk about it. In this episode, I answer Jay's question about what roles in the modern Navy we might see in the game. There are 5 branches of the Navy that would be relevant to Star Citizen. These are warfare, engineering, logistics, medical, and aviation. I'll leave the Royal Marines to an actual Marine, at least for now. We'll come to warfare in just a moment, because not everyone is going to be focused on combat. There is one role on board ship, however, that is going to be relevant to almost every player in the game: engineering. There's enough information out there on the systems that CIG are putting in place for engineering to know that anyone who pilots a ship will need to know how to use it at some point. Whether it's shutting down non-critical relays to conserve power and fuel, rerouting power because of battle damage, or just reacting to general wear and tear of components. People are going to be at serious disadvantage if they don't at least have a basic knowledge of engineering gameplay. Now, on board a modern warship, engineers are either marine engineers who deal with propulsion and what we call hotel load, stuff like power, water, ventilation, etc. They could be weapon engineers who maintain weapon systems and sensors, and aviation engineers responsible for aircraft, all their handling equipment, and generally just topping up their suntan. Now, there's absolutely no indication that players will need to specialise like this, but it is an interesting thought with ships like the Javelin and the Bengal. All of this stuff, all of these bases will need to be covered all of the time, especially in combat. For the sake of simplicity, let's take warfare as separate to single-seat fighters for the moment. Fighters have more in common with the Navy's aviation branch, so we'll deal with that in a little while. For a lot of the time, warfare is going to mean general stuff, just flying a ship anytime you get into combat, or manning a turret on a manned ship. In the Royal Navy, one of the specialisations in warfare is electronic warfare, or EW. This would be a really interesting crossover. Electronic warfare rates employ methods like jamming enemy communications, jamming sensors, intercepting their transmissions in order to help fight the war. Think about how a radar works just for a second. The radar sends out a pulse that not only needs to be strong enough to hit and bounce off the target, but also make it back to the radar so that it can be picked up and show on your screen as a contact. That means that in the real world, radar beams hit ships all the time that don't show up because they're either too far away, or they're too small, or they're just too stealthy in design to actually show up. I know it sounds like I'm talking about stealth gameplay rather than roles, but bear with me. In the real world, military vessels receive these pulses from ships that are too far away to actually see the warship. They're able to look at that signal and interpret it, analyse them to know exactly what they're looking at. Radars operate in different bands, meaning that a pulse from a navigation radar is different to an early warning radar, is different to a weapon targeting radar. It's like in Top Gun when all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. Someone announces they've got a lock on me and the aircraft systems go mental. That's the aircraft actually detecting that a certain radar band used by weapon targeting systems has now locked onto that aircraft. On warships, these systems are far more complex and can provide a lot more information to the command team. This could be a role that we see later on down the line. Electronic warfare personnel also advise on things like what countermeasures to use against what type of missile. With the Nautilus in the game, mine warfare will be an important specialisation, not just in placing them and determining how they're triggered, what sort of patterns they're laid in, but also in clearing them. I mean, Yeah, maybe we'll just get to target and shoot them like any other thing in space, but maybe it'll be a bit more involved. Maybe it'll carry an element of risk. Maybe you've got to get really close to them to pick them up accurately, which risks triggering them. Military intelligence is a really interesting thing to start incorporating into the game. I mean, if you look at things like EVE Online, that's all done with people spying on other organisations and having second accounts where they leave ships near stations to see what other fleets are doing, but this could actually be incorporated in more of an integral way by CIG if they wanted to. Intelligence officers could have a bunch of contracts, like meeting other agents, making dead drops, spying on targets, recon, planting bugs and tracking devices. There's also the possibility of doing things to give you intel on other contracts, being able to determine more information than people that don't have an intel officer on board. You could even do things like recruit NPCs to alert you via your mobiGlas if a certain fleet's in an area or they've noticed something suspicious. I mean, I just made intelligence rates in the Royal Navy sound like James friggin' Bond, and they're not. They're just a bunch of nerds sat in an office. But this is just how you'd make it interesting in Star Citizen. I'm actually going to revisit the whole warfare idea and the warfare department in a future video about capital ships and how they could operate in wartime in the game. So that will cover warfare in a whole load more depth. If you're not subscribed, make sure you do if you don't want to miss out on that. Logistics is a challenging one because it's just so bloody boring. I mean, if you want to be a chef or a HR staffer or in the store chain in Star Citizen, then great. I just don't see it as having mainstream appeal. I mean, there's really interesting possibilities for logistics that I'll talk about in that video, but for those of us on smaller ships, certainly, logistics will just be something we do as part of our day-to-day gameplay. Food, drink, fuel, ammo, making sure you've got the right armor and equipment for whatever voyage and whatever contract you're doing. And I think that's going to be about the extent of it. Aviation on warships fulfills a number of different roles. A helicopter is the safest way to attack a submarine, for example. They're great for moving men and material, executing search and rescue, and they're also used for inserting troops, boarding, airborne early warning, and DAMAS, a military term short for damage assessment. Sooner or later, ships will just stop exploding when they've run out of health. They're going to drift and power down and be damaged in other ways. When this happens, DAMAS is actually going to be pretty important. Is the ship that you're moving towards actually disabled? Are they just lying in wait, hoping that you'll close them? It's easier to risk a small single-seat fighter than it is your Polaris or your Javelin. It's why when you approach a military operation, you need to have a really clear idea of what it is you're being asked to do and all the other things that task might entail. It's going to change whether or not, if you have a ship with the ability to dock a smaller one, the type of ship that you will take. Are you just going to enhance your combat ability by taking a fighter? Are you going to take something that can carry troops onto a target? Are you going to take something that can recover casualties if you need to? These choices are going to make Star Citizen quite interesting, and if there are orgs out there who would be interested in a video on kind of the orders process and how you go through setting up an organisation, setting up a fleet for a task, let me know down in the comments and I'll see if I can get round to it. Now, medical facilities on warships are something that I've talked about in a previous video, and I've linked that down in the description below. It'll be another area of gameplay that we all do as part of our everyday kind of Star Citizen lives. You know, we're all going to have to heal ourselves, we're all going to have to heal friends at some point. But for some, dedicated medical gameplay will come as part of supporting larger fleets, or as maybe a dedicated search and rescue operator. Pilot rescue during fleet battles will be challenging and will probably take quite a bit of coordination between the search and rescue vessel and maybe some fighters to cover it or being shielded by a larger vessel. I think drones are actually going to take a large part of that work, but we'll have to see how they fit in. Whilst we might be out of departments now, we're not out of roles. If you imagine life on board the warship in the middle of the ocean, it can be days until help arrives. If you get a fire or a flood, you can't just go stand outside and wait for the emergency services to turn up. Every single sailor is trained in firefighting, damage control, and also a little bit of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defence. Now, this is pretty unusual for a British warfare officer, but because I served on one of the landing platforms, I was actually trained as a damage control officer, so I can talk at some length about firefighting and floods and all of that sort of stuff. But at the moment, just think about if you're trying to move around the ship, the effect of fire is going to have on you, the fact that we can't wear armour at our stations, so what's the effect of maybe an area being open to the environment because they've blown a hole in the side of the ship, all those sorts of things, and also how that's going to affect your ship's effectiveness, your combat efficiency, as you are then sending turret gunners and other people performing critical roles away from their station to stop the fire spreading to the ammunition or to the fuel. The ships in Star Citizen are becoming so detailed that we're going to have to remember things like where's the nearest firefighting apparatus? Is there any emergency breathing apparatus? And what about the escape pods? Where are they and what's the quickest route to them from wherever I am in the ship? Whether you've been watching my content for a while or whether you're absolutely brand new here, I'm really interested in how this episode's gone, whether you've enjoyed it, what you would have change in the future, and other topics you'd like to see me cover. I intend to make this a core part of my channel's content. So smash the like button if you've enjoyed it. You've been watching Drinkers with Gaming Problems. Thank you very much for stopping by. I'll see you soon.